voice. We're very excited to announce that this year, the Manchester City Library will be continuing our tradition for an adult summer reading program. The adult summer reading program is open to anyone 18 plus. Participants earn points for reading, attending programs, and completing missions. And you can use those points to purchase raffle tickets for 8 different raffles to be drawn weekly. Mark your calendars. The program will run from June 20th to August 12th. Sign up starts on June 1st. And without further ado, Ron Trexler will be your presenter today. Ron has been a UNH Extension Master Gardener since 2016 and has achieved the level of Advanced Master Gardener. He is extensively involved in the training and mentoring of new Master Gardeners, trains Master Gardeners who wish to participate in the Master Gardener Speakers Bureau, and regularly presents to libraries, garden clubs, and community organizations. In addition, Ron serves in a leadership role with the Hooksett Garden Club and serves on the executive board of the New Hampshire Federation of Garden Clubs. He especially enjoys growing vegetables in raised beds that benefit from his home composting system. And now he's going to get his presentation started. We do have a camera that will be turning on momentarily that is set up for an audience view. So make sure when that pops up, you lock that screen so that you can see Ron demonstrating and showing off different tools and supplies for his presentation. Thank you, Ron.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. So welcome. First thing I want to say is please make sure that you reach out through chat with any questions. I'm here to impart some education to you, and obviously you're here hopefully to learn some things. And the best way we can make that happen is if you have that question in your mind, that you go ahead and get that into the chat so that that can be brought up forward to me. Are we good?
I'm double checking on my camera view.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. All right. So normally the first thing I would ask of everyone is what do you hope to learn today? Obviously, you're here for a reason. There's some things that you would like to learn. I'm here to hopefully answer some of those questions, and I have an agenda that I'm going to cover. But obviously, with the chat process, we'll just go ahead and move to the screen. So with today's discussion, I'm going to start with the vegetable garden. Then I'm going to move on into the perennials. We're going to talk about the lawn a little bit, which is just as important for those that have it. We're going to talk about trees and shrubs and how we get those ready to survive the season. And then we'll talk about some general tasks that we can do this time of year during those days when we're not actually getting in the garden and planting. So we're going to start with the vegetable garden. And even though it's, we've had some warm weather in March, kind of the new thing these years with climate change, that we get really hot, warm days in March, and then all of a sudden it cools back down again. And that cold weather kind of delays what we would hopefully like to try to do. But certainly this time of year, we can put in our cool season crops, our lettuces and spinaches and any of our other leafy greens. Our root vegetables certainly can be put in this time of year as well. Our warm season vegetables, for instance, tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and those types of things. Soil temperature is really important. I know the general rule of thumb, again, I would ask this out there, but since we're mostly on chat here, I'll just go ahead and proceed. Is Memorial Day weekend, right? That's kind of the adage in New Hampshire. That's when we put our vegetables in the garden. Well, a few years ago, I was really busy doing what I do now, which is doing a lot of presentations and stuff. And I didn't really have a lot of time to get my vegetables in. But Memorial Day weekend, I got about half of them in. I got about half of each of my crops into the ground. Didn't have time to get them all in. So then I waited probably about a couple of weeks, maybe the middle of June, by the time I got the rest of the plants in the ground. By July 4th weekend, the plants that I had planted in June had outgrown the plants that I had planted on Memorial Day weekend. And the reason for that is because of soil temperature. And if you get those plants in the ground before that soil has adequately warmed up, you're going to stunt the growth of those plants. They'll still grow, and I did get production out of those plants that I planted early, but I got much more production out of the plants that I planted later in the season. So waiting until that soil temperature is warmed up to the temperatures that those particular plants like, and it's generally going to be in the mid 60s for those warm season crops. That's really, so it's not necessarily a date on the calendar. It's phenology. It's what's actually happening in our climate that's going to determine when we want to get those plants in the ground. Now, we all know that the key to healthy plants is a healthy soil. So I do want to spend a little time on soil, because without good, healthy soil, the only thing that's going to really grow very well are weeds and invasives and things that don't mind poor soil conditions. So if we want our plants to thrive and have good fruit production, good flower production, we want to make sure that we are providing a really good, healthy soil. So let's talk a little bit about having your soil tested, which is key. Now, UNH provides a soil test. It's about $20. This time of year, it's going to be a little slow getting that information back, simply because it's just busy this time of year. But there are other soil testing labs that do it. I went online today, and there's dozens in various states, both in New England and throughout the country, that can do soil tests. So you're not keyed into just New Hampshire, but obviously, in fact, New Hampshire actually sends their soil test out to an independent lab outside of the state of New Hampshire. So, so it really doesn't matter where you go to get that. The first thing that you're going to see is the form that you're going to fill out. You're going to let the testing lab know what it is you're testing. So it could be vegetable beds, could be flower beds, could be lawn, could be trees and shrubs or whatever. And you'll fill that out. And this form is available on the UNH Extension website. You just go to unh.edu, type in soil test, and this form will come up. And the information that you're going to get back is going to have some really critical test data that you need to know in order to properly prepare your vegetables, in this particular case, vegetable gardens, for the spring. So you can see a bunch of different boxes up here. In the red box is going to be some of the macronutrients that we're going to be looking at. And the blue box is what the actual measurements are, and the yellow box is what the optimum range should be. And then in the green box is where what you have falls within what the optimal range would be. And then finally, in the yellow box is some other information that we're going to talk about. So let's kind of look at these a little bit one at a time. So the first thing that we're going to look at is pH. Now, you can test your pH without going through a soil test. You can buy soil test kits at garden centers, big box stores and whatnot that will give you that. But why pH is important? Because all of the nutrients that the plants want and need in order to thrive and survive are available to that plant at different pH ranges. And if you look at the bottom of the screen here, you see the pH range from 4 to 10. So from acidic at 4 to alkaline at 10. And you can see that each of these nutrients that we want for our plants, looking at the green boxes, are available to the plant at different pH levels. But if you look at the sweet spot, which is around 6.2 to 7.2, you can see that, with the exception of iron, which likes a more acidic soil in order to be available, and molybdenum, which is likes a more alkaline soil in order to be available, all the other nutrients are available to the plant in pretty good quantities right in that sweet spot. So that's the target range that we want, is somewhere in that mid sixes. And if we're there, then the nutrients that we add to the soil are going to be useful the way that we want them to be. So let's kind of talk about each one a little bit. So first is calcium. And the reason why calcium is important to the soil is, just like us, that we need calcium for strong bones. Plants need calcium for their structure. Calcium provides structural support to cell walls. It's critical for cell elongation and division for that plant to grow. So one of the easy ways to get calcium into the soil is bone meal. So bone meal is going to give us, this particular brand gives us 12% calcium. So it's going to give some good calcium, but the one drawback to calcium, the bone meal, is it provides other nutrients to the soil, and we really want to kind of target that. So a better choice for adding soil calcium to our soil is sulfur. In this particular brand, the calcium available is 20% with another 60% in sulfur. And sulfur is kind of, we don't really think about sulfur. We think about the NPK, right? Everybody's heard of the NPK, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. Those are the three main nutrients that we look at when we're thinking about fertilizers. And sulfur is kind of the fourth. It really is just as important to that organic matter in the soil. And lime will also add calcium. Now, eggshells, a lot of people say, well, I'm going to crush up some eggshells and put that in the soil. Honestly, eggshells is a poor source of calcium. It takes quite a bit of time for eggshells to break down into a useful source of calcium for plants. So eggshells is better to go into your compost pile as opposed to directly into your soil. And another thing I want to touch on calcium is blossom end rot. And we think about blossom end rot in tomatoes, zucchini, and other vegetables. And a lot of times people say, well, that's not enough calcium in the soil. And actually, that's not correct. While blossom end rot is a sign of calcium deficiency, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's not enough calcium in the soil. It's generally because of irregular watering habits. And those irregular watering habits is what causes the calcium deficiency. So before you go adding calcium to the soil because you had blossom end rot the year before, you really want to do a soil test to make sure that that is the issue. And you can see in this particular soil test, the calcium level is actually high. So if I was getting blossom end rot and I added more calcium to the soil, I'm not solving the problem. The problem is something else. And again, more likely, it's going to be poor watering conditions. All right, so the next thing on the list is magnesium. And why magnesium is important is it helps regulate the uptake of nutrients. So all the other nutrients that a plant needs sufficient magnesium in the soil in order for that to happen. So if we're weak on magnesium, if our magnesium is low, and on our chart here, magnesium is good, it's right in the middle. So we're good on magnesium. But if magnesium was low, we'd see yellowing in the plants. We'd see the plants not really thriving very well. And we would think, well, the plant's yellowing, I need more green, I need more nitrogen. No, not necessarily. A soil test is the only thing that's really going to help us understand why those plants are yellowing. And it could be magnesium, it could be nitrogen, but a soil test is the only way that's going to make that happen. If we needed to add magnesium, Epsom salt is an option that we could put in there. Keeping in mind that Epsom salt, while it's magnesium sulfate and does add magnesium to the soil, it is a salt. So we need to be careful adding Epsom salt to the soil that we don't put too much salt in the soil, because while salt is good, too much salt is not good. And therefore, too much magnesium can actually inhibit that calcium uptake, right? So here we are, all hand in hand. So we really kind of know where we're at. The next thing on the list is potassium. That's one of our major NPK nutrients. Potassium helps the plant fight off diseases, keeps it vigorous, helps it withstand temperatures and ward off disease. It also regulates respiration and transpiration. That's the movement of water throughout the plant, and helps provide drought resistance. Plants deficient in potash will see stunted leaves, stunted fruit, and be therefore extra sensitive to drought. We can add potash by adding wood ash or potash. This particular brand is 0060. So potash is that third number, the K in the NPK. So now we're adding potash. We're targeting specifically in adding potash. And you can see in this soil test that potash is low. So we want to add potash, but we don't want to be adding the other nutrients that are in there. The next would be phosphorus. What phosphorus does is promotes root development, which helps those roots anchor and strengthen those plants, provides winter hardiness. It's also essential for flower production that's necessary to produce fruit. So the bone meal that we talked about before also has phosphorus in addition to calcium. This one is a 412O, so 4% calcium, 4% phosphorus. If we were really low on phosphorus, we could use a triple super phosphate. This one is 0.450. So again, that middle number, we're targeting that. Now, I do want to say a couple things about phosphorus. And as you can see on the chart here, this particular soil test phosphorus is very high. The optimum range is 170 to 280. The actual measurement of this soil in the soil test was 407. So more than double the top range. So if I add a standard 10-10-10 or 20-20-20 nutrient mix, which is what we generally find when we go to the nursery or to a big box store, I'm exacerbating a problem that I already have. I've already got too much phosphorus in the soil. So this is why the soil test is important. This is why knowing exactly what nutrients your soil needs and only adding what needs to be added and not adding nutrients that are already in there too high. So again, this is the 0.4540 on this particular brand of phosphate. Now, there's one nutrient that you don't see up here. Remember, I talked a little bit about NPK, nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, so the three important nutrients that we want in our soil, the macronutrients. But you don't see nitrogen listed, and yet it's one of the important ones, right? Well, the reason why we don't see nitrogen in a soil test is because it's too volatile. By the time you actually get the soil out, sent to a lab, it gets to the lab, and by the time they test it, that nitrogen has already pretty much faded out of the soil. So testing for nitrogen is super, super expensive. It's only done in a very rare situation. But over years and years of research, the labs know, based on the other chemicals that they are testing, how much nitrogen should be in there, and they will actually give you that in the recommendations, when I'm going to get to in just a second. If you did need to add nitrogen, if you had a plant that was starving for nitrogen, if you, let's say, mulch with wood chips, and as wood chips degrade, they actually rob nitrogen from the soil. So if you're using wood chips as your mulch, you're going to want to add a little nitrogen. The best way to get just nitrogen and nitrogen only into the soil is blood meal. So the blood meal you can see here is 12%. So it's only nitrogen that's going into the soil, not anything else. And that way you're going to be able to target that. So again, back to the chart, right? So my potassium is, in this particular, is really low, and the phosphorus is very high. So putting in a generic, again, as I said, a 10-10-10 or 14-14-14, like a slow release fertilizer, I'm kind of solving one problem, but I'm exacerbating the other problem. And that's why it's critical that we know exactly what our soil test is telling us, to know exactly what amendments we want to put into the soil before we start putting no veggies in there, so that we make sure that we get the right nutrients at the right amount that the plants need. Well, fortunately, the soil test is actually going to tell us what those are, and it's going to give us both conventional and organic recommendations. And you can see here that it says you recommend only broadcast blah, blah, blah. So a 10-0-10, so nothing in that middle, plus a 0-0-22. In other words, we need to boost that right number without boosting that middle number. And it's going to tell you exactly what you need to do in order to do that. So I know I've spent a lot of time on soil. It is important. It's critical to the health of the plants. It's critical to really everything that you do. And that's why I wanted to spend time on it. So before I move on, let me just check with the chat and see if we've got any questions on soil. How we doing? Good. They can come later, no worries. All right, so let's go move on into the vegetable garden. So if you have any debris left over from the harvest from last year, you want to take that out and get it in your compost pile, and hopefully you all are composting. Any diseased plants or leaves, the normal rule of thumb is to discard them instead of composting them. And the reason for that is that any pathogens or whatnot that might be in those diseased leaves require sustained temps over 130 degrees for at least 2 or 3 days in order for those pathogens to be killed in your compost pile. Now, of course, if you've ever been able to attend one of my composting sessions, you can see that I can get my compost pile up into that red zone, which is going to kill any pathogens. It's going to kill any weed seeds. And so I'm not too fussy if I've got some tomato plants that had some septoria leaf spot. I'm not worried about throwing that in the compost pile. If I've got some cucumbers that had a little bit of powdery mildew or bee balm that might have had a little powdery mildew, or peonies are another one that's susceptible to it. So I've got a little bit of powdery mildew on some of those plants. I'm not too worried about putting those in my compost pile because I know my compost pile is going to get the job done and go ahead and take them out. But if you don't, then you want to go ahead and leave those out of your pile. Now, tilling. I do want to talk about tilling a little bit because this is really important. In your soil, you have some really beneficial a bacteria-like fungus, which is called Actinomycetes. And if you've ever kind of dug into your soil and see these long, white web-like strands in your soil, that is the Actinomycetes. When you power till your garden, which is, I know, kind of a common thing across the country, especially here in New Hampshire, is to get the power tiller out there, and you're going to destroy that beautiful web of bad bacteria eating fungi. And what is preferred is to surface till. So I have a couple examples here of some surface tillers. This is one here that just will scratch things kind of in the top few inches. This one here, this hound dog here, is good for getting down about 3 or 4 inches. And you don't want to be down when you're tilling your amendments in or your compost in. You don't want to be down more than about 4 inches or so as you turn those in. So again, for those that can't see it, got a couple of pictures on the screen here. And so we want to make sure that that any amendments that we add in, we just kind of scratch those in. If we need to use a power tiller, say we're going to start a new garden and we've got to crash through, sod or heavy roots and stuff like that, then that's fine, because now we're starting a new garden and those Actinomycetes really haven't built up in that area yet. And if we do want to power till, we want to make sure we do it when the soil's more to the dry side. You don't want to do it after a rain because you're going to get clumps as you power till. And those clumps are going to be really hard to break down. And if you think about the design of those tillers, how those blades kind of turn in a little bit at the bottom of the throw. And as that power tiller is thrashing around at that depth, it's going to create a hard pan. It's going to create a solid pan at the bottom of the throw of those blades. And what that does is it cuts off the earthworm holes that come up and grab the organic matter and bring that down into the root zone of the plants. So if you have to power till, if you're creating a new garden and you create that hard pan as a result of that, what you want to go back in later with a pitchfork or a broad fork and poke through that soil layer to get those holes back into that structure so that those earthworms have that free movement to come up and pull any organic matter and pull it back down into the root zone. All right, so weeds. Who likes to weed, right? I'm probably not going to see a lot of show of hands there. Now, I don't mind, I've got maple trees in my yard. You get those little helicopters come down, you get a couple of roots that kind of start to set in the mulch, and those are really easy to pick out. And those are kind of a mindless, nice, easy activity to do. And I don't mind that kind of weeding, but it's those brutal perennial weeds that just are awful to try to get out of your garden. And they just keep coming back year after year after year. Well, I'm going to show you on the next few slides my secret to having to never to weed in my vegetable garden. I don't touch a weed all year long. I can focus on harvesting. I can focus on cutting flowers in my flower beds. I can focus on more fun things to do in the garden rather than fighting with those awful, awful, awful weeds. So my particular vegetable garden is broken up into a bunch of raised beds. Now this will work whether you have a raised bed or not. Doesn't really matter. Mine just happen to be. So don't get carved off in those pictures. So first thing I'm going to do in the spring is I'm going to amend the soil. I'll have done a soil test. I will do my soil test in the fall, and I don't do it every year. Do it maybe every 3 years, depending on how the progress is going based on what I saw in previous tests. So I'm going to add my soil amendments. I'm going to add my compost. I'm going to lightly till that into the surface. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put down my soaker hose. Now I use soaker hose. You can use drip irrigation. You can use whatever. But what I like about soaker hoses and drip irrigation is another feature is you're watering the roots. You're not watering the leaves. So, creating potential hazards for septoria leaf spot in your tomatoes or powdery mildew in your cucumbers, right? You're not getting the leaves wet. You're watering right at the roots, and it's the roots that need the water to be brought up into the plant, not the leaves. Water comes in through the roots. Very, very, very little, if any at all, comes in through the leaves. And then I'm going to put down newspaper. I'm going to wet that as I go. And a lot of people think, well, geez, I thought I heard that newspaper had toxic inks in it, right? Well, yes, back in the day, that's true. But newspaper today is made with vegetable dyes. So you don't get the hazards and toxins from newspaper print that you used to get. Now, I don't use glossy newsprint like sales flyers and things like that. I just use regular straight newspaper. After that, I'm going to put down some landscape cloth, weed block. And I never recommend using weed block in a garden, with the exception of here. And the reason why I do it here is because this is only temporary. This weed fabric is only down through the middle late of the growing season. In the end of August and early September, I'm going to actually take this out and I'm going to plant a cover crop down. You don't want permanent weed fabric in a permanent garden bed, because what happens over a period of a couple of years, the fine root hairs in your trees, your shrubs, your plants and whatnot will eventually work their way into those holes, the holes that let the water through the landscape fabric. And then it just becomes a real mess, a real nightmare trying to get new plants in, remulching and adding compost and stuff like that. It just gets to be a real problem. So I only use weed fabric in this particular application. When I'm ready to put my plants in, once the soil temperature, as I mentioned before, has gotten up to the degree that I know that it's a good time to put those warm season crops in, I'm going to feel around with my finger. I want to make sure that I know where the soaker hose is. Can't see it, but I want to know where it is so that when I cut an X to put my plant in, I don't want to be cutting through the soaker hose. So I can move that kind of out of the way, put it in the spot that I want. Then I'm going to take a bulb tool and remove a little bit of the soil. I'm going to take my transplant, my seedling, and I'm going to put that into the hole. I'm going to fold the newspaper and the cloth back over that. So now I have just a little tiny slit, no room for weeds to get in there. And then you can see here's real late in the season. This is probably mid-August, I guess. And you can see all my beds are completely clean. I don't have a single weed in any of my vegetable beds. All right, so before I move on to perennials, any burning questions so far? Anything out there? I know you're here to learn some stuff. What do you got? Nothing in the chat. All right, we have a very quiet group tonight, very unusual. All right, well, let's move on to the perennial beds. Now, I wish I could say this is my garden, but unfortunately it's not. I do have some nice flowers in mine, but certainly nothing to the epic scale that this is here. All right, so the first thing we want to do is just kind of take stock, right? This time of year, we want to take a walk through the garden. Garden's been kind of laying unseen and untouched since fall. Your first order of business is to take a walk through and see what kind of broke. And, if you've got some raised beds, you've got any rot, you want to kind of deal with that. If you got trellises that kind of broke over the course of the winter, any posts or whatnot, you want to start to deal with that. And now's a good time to work on those things. And of course, you're going to have debris in the yard. You're going to have branches that fell down off the trees. You want to start to pull that up. Any stuff that you can get a chance to get rid of in the fall before snow came, you can start to clean that stuff up. Remove any remaining foliage, any areas again that you didn't get to clean up. Any stuff that you left for winter interest, like tall grasses and things like that, or plants where it still had seed heads that you wanted to leave up for the birds. Now is a good time to go ahead and get those tied up. And if you didn't have a chance to label any of the plants in the fall, which is the best time to do it, now is a good time to start to mark those locations so you know where those things are going to come up. This particular bed of daylilies and irises is kind of messy and can harbor diseases. So I like to clean this up in the fall. It's a lot easier to clear this in the fall as opposed to one particular year. I didn't have time to do that. This is what happens in the spring when the snow finally melted. And the problem with trying to get in there and clean this up now, right, is I've got some stuff that's starting to pop up through there, right? So whereas in the fall, I could have got in there with my hedgers, and I could have got in there and just chop away at all that dying stuff in the fall. Now in the spring, I'm gonna do that now. I gotta be real careful, because if I get in there and just thrash away, I'm gonna be cutting away all the green stuff that's starting to pop up through there. So it's kind of up to you. Do it in the fall, do it in the spring. I like to do it in the fall when I can. Clearly, I can't always do it in the fall. So if you got to do it this time of year, you just got to be a little more careful, kind of pick and choose what you're going to chop away at. All right, so any plants that you left up that have hollow stems, your bee balms, your daylilies that you might have left the hollow stems up so that the mason bees, our native bees, our solitary bees, could get in there and plant their eggs. Once we've had those at least 3 consecutive days of 50 degrees or better, which happened quite a while back. So we're good to go now. So now you can get in there and cut those stems away. And the bees have already hatched and they're happy and they're off and they're on their way. And of course, just being careful of the basal foliage that we don't damage that. All right, dividing perennials. Now is a great time of the year to divide perennials. Perennials need to be divided every few years, and every plant's a little bit different. Some can take dividing every couple of years, some every 3 to 5 years. And a plant will really tell you when it's ready to be divided. Some of the signs that you'll see in a plant that that's ready to be divided is there'll be a bald spot in the middle on a bushy type plant. You'll see that it's kind of dead in the middle of the plant, but growing real great around the outside. And that's because as those perennials grow, it adds new shoots and roots to the outside of the plant. And so what happens is that in the middle of the plant, it gets compacted. And the middle of the plant is fighting for light, for nutrients, for soil space, for root space. And so those parts die off. Another thing that you might notice is it doesn't bloom as much as it used to. You're not getting as many flowers as you got in years past, or the flowers that you are getting aren't as big as they used to be. Those are all signs that a perennial is in need of division, and that division will help invigorate the plant. It'll give those roots new space to grow and flourish and create new blooms and really get back to the plant that it used to be a few years ago. Now, there's a couple of things. There's a couple of ways to divide a perennial. One is to dig around the whole plant and lift it up out of the ground and then kind of pull it apart. That's the kind of cleanest, safest way to do it. If you have a plant that's really clumped together, then you have to kind of divide down through the middle of the plant, either with a saw or with a shovel, as you see in the picture here. You're doing major surgery on that plant, right? You're taking a plant and chopping through the middle of that plant and exposing it to, pathogens and insects and diseases and things that it's never had to been exposed to before. So think about surgery, right? If you were to go into a surgeon's operating room, there's two things you wouldn't want that surgeon to do, right? One is to use a dull scalpel, right? Because it's going to create more damage as he cuts through your skin and through your organs and whatnot. There's more damage that's going to be created with a dull scalpel that you will heal eventually, but it's going to take longer to heal than if you use a nice clean scalpel. And then of course you wouldn't want to use him a scalpel that he used on you that he used on the patient before. So there's two things we really should do when we're going to divide a perennial, especially if we're going to chop down through the middle of the plant like we're seeing here. One is to make sure that we're using a sharp tool, and we want to make sure that that tool is sterile so they're not transplanting pathogens from one plant to another. And within the same garden area, that's not as important. But if you're, say, dividing plants in one garden bed, maybe in the front of the house, and then in another bed in the back of the house or the side of the house, those are kind of two different ecosystems. And there's pathogens that will be within those ecosystems that those plants in that area are used to that the plants in another area would not. So let me just do a quick demonstration. Hopefully we can see this for the folks online. So if I take my spade, this is a spade, not a shovel. Shovel is actually a flat, has a flat end, so that's what we call a spade. And what I'm going to do is take this and I'm going to use a 10-inch, it's called a bastard file, and it doesn't mean I'm mad at this file, it's just that's what the cut of the of whatnot is called. And what I'm going to do is put it on a super firm surface. So normally I would put this on the ground and put my foot on here. But here, just so that you all can see it here, what I'm going to do is just hold this firm. I'm going to take this and I'm going to do about a 22.5-degree angle. And right, I heard you were eating, but 22.5 degrees. Come on, give you a break here. So let's think about this for a second. This is 90. This is 45. This is 22.5. So we want to be at about a half of a 45-degree angle. And what we want to do is starting at the tip here. Get 22.5 degrees. We're going to slide down sides. And you'll kind of feel those bars. The shovel's already sharp because I've done this demonstration a few times now in some of the presentations I've already been doing. So this one's nice. But you'll feel these bars when you get down through the head. And when you get a smooth roll, it doesn't kind of buck on you as you slide that file down. Now you got a nice sharp edge that's going to make a nice clean cut when we take and chop down through the middle of that plant. And then for sterilizing, well, that's easy. Get yourselves isopropyl alcohol. This is a 70% mix, blended with water and a spray bottle. And I'm just going to get a spray. And isopropyl alcohol is the same stuff we've been using on our hands for the last, 3 years or so because of COVID, right? So it's a quick, fast acting solution that will kill 99.9% of any bacteria that might be on the plant. Now, again, you don't necessarily have to sterilize between every cut. You don't necessarily have to sharpen between every cut. But as you get out there and get ready to start dividing, your plants are going to heal faster, produce faster if you give them a nice clean cut and not potentially introduce any pathogens into the plant. Absolutely, great.
The question is, if there is a center hole in a larger perennial, that means it needs to be divided and replanted?
Yes, absolutely. So great question. Thank you for asking that. So, so that bald spot or that center hole or that gap that's in the middle plant has been created because as the plant has grown and it has continued to create new shoots and new roots on the outside of the plant, the part and the plant in the middle is starving. It's being choked out by that new pressure of those new shoots and roots that are growing on the outside. So depending on the size of the plant and what type of plant it is, and there are charts online, and I have one that I can send to anybody that's interested about different plants and how those different plants can be divided. But as the general rule of thumb is, we can either, back to the slide, you can either just cut right down through the middle of that plant and take half of it away, or a quarter of it away, or a third of it away, depending on how big the plant is and how big the hole is in the middle. And eventually, and you could leave half in place, and eventually it will fill in. If the plant is kind of off-centered when you do that, and you want to kind of put it back in the center, then the better thing to do is to dig the whole plant up and then divide it in half, and then, or a third or a quarter, whatever, depending on how big it is. You might be able to get 4 plants out of it, right? So then take the division and then put it back in the center of the hole that you just dug the plant out of, and then take those other 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever, however many divisions you have, and then you can go plant them out somewhere else, or share them with a neighbor, or donate them to your garden club's plant sale, etc. But yeah, that bald spot is that indication that it's just so choked and restricted in the center of that plant that we need to divide that and give that some more space to grow. Absolutely, great question. Thank you. All right, so we talked a little about weeds. Sometimes we have really nasty weeds, Japanese barberry, some weeds that just Oriental bittersweet, invasives in particular, that can just be brutal. And the best way to handle those is to take some black plastic, heavy black plastic, and cover that area. And do that in the well, actually right now is a good time of the year because stuff is starting to sprout, starting to come up out of the ground. And then leave that there for, I don't know, 3-4 weeks or so, and then peel that black plastic back and tuck it off to the side. And the energy that's in those roots is going to produce more shoots. But those shoots start to pop up out of the ground, give it another couple, 3 weeks for there, then take that black plastic and put it back over there again. And now it's going to kill those shoots. And you're going to let those die off. And again, 2, 3, 4 weeks. Pull that black plastic again, pull it back, tuck it off to the side. More shoots are going to grow. There's a lot of energy in those roots. Perennials, what perennials do in the fall is they take the leaves and they absorb the chlorophyll from the sun, and they create energy, sugars and carbohydrates that they send down into the roots. And that's why those perennials come back in the spring, is because of that energy that they stored back in those root systems. Doesn't happen with annuals, only happens with perennials. So all that energy, that life, is stored down in that root system. So when we pull that plastic back, that energy that's still in those roots will still continue to push out roots. Cover it back up again. And now it may take 4 or 5, depending on what you're trying to eliminate. It may take 4, 5, 6 times over the course of a season to finally exhaust all of that energy in that root system before that has finally died out. And then you can go ahead and go in and plant there. Now in every flower bed, so we're talking about perennials, you have weed problem areas. So over time, birds dropping seeds, weed seeds into your garden, weed seeds that blow in the wind and land in your garden, no matter how well a job you do, mulching and whatnot, you're going to get weed seeds are eventually going to come into your garden. And again, if they're perennial weeds, they can be really brutal to take care of. So I'm going to show you a couple examples, some pictures of some weed problem areas and how I've dealt with them, and actually dealt with them pretty successfully. So here is my kind of pollinator garden. I got a lot of milkweed and some other plants, and you can see that it's just overrun, completely overrun with weeds. It's just really brutal in there. So in the fall, so this is a fall project. So in the fall, what I'm going to do is yank as much of that weed root out as I can, get as much as I can. Same thing with the vegetable bed. I'm going to take and put newspaper down, and you can see I'm going to paper around all the plants. So this is a hydrangea here. I got a rose bush here. I got Joe Pye weed here. I got all my milkweed plants over here. This is a lemon balm plant I got here. I'm going to paper around those because I want those to come back. And then I use wood chips for mulch. Again, you can use shredded leaves, you can use grass, whatever your favorite mulch is. I'm going to put that down on top, and I'm going to do the next section. I'm going to do, depending on how big the bed is, you're going to do a section at a time. So I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm papering around all of my milkweed plants here. And I've done all around all these plants. So these are all going to come back fine in the spring. Same thing, same thing. And now you can see this is about mid-spring. You can see all the plants are growing. They're healthy. They're going like crazy. Got some lupin here. Got my hydrangea, my rose bush in the background here. All my milkweed seeds, and there's no weeds down in here. No weeds. And here's even later in the season, everything's flowering like crazy. Again, no weeds. No weeds in that area there. So the plants are thriving. They're not competing with the weeds for nutrients and light and water and whatnot. And they're able to establish themselves and go successfully. And this is going to be good. This will last me, depending on how well I got those perennial roots out, it's going to last me at least 3 years, sometimes a little bit longer. So this isn't a permanent 100% forever solution, because again, birds fly in, going after the caterpillars on the and the butterflies and whatnot, and they're going to poop as they fly overhead or fly in around here. They're going to poop weed seeds into that garden. So the weeds are eventually going to come back. It's just that's nature. It's but at least if I get, a good 3 years without having to get in there and get after those horrible perennial weeds, it's 3 more years of time spent doing more fun things in the garden. All right, so the lawn. So we don't always think about the lawn, but over the course of the winter, we get snow piles, especially along the driveway or along the road. And we get snow mold, which will grow underneath the snow. So what we want to do is take any of those big, deep parts of snow. Of course, it's all gone now. So let's think about this for next year, right? Because we don't have any more snow on the ground. But next year, you get those snow banks. What you want to do is just get out there with a shovel and just spread that snow out so it melts more evenly across the whole yard. So you don't have these areas where you have the grass is starting to grow in one area, but you get this big snowbank in another. So it's taking longer for that grass to heal and get ready for spring. Again, debris in the yard, you want to clean all that up. If you want to overseed, now spring is a good time to dethatch, to aerate the lawn. This is the time that you want to do that. And if you're going to overseed, what you want to do is use a Endofin. Oh, I went too far. Hang on a second. I'm going to look at my notes here for a second. Endophyte enhanced grasses. What that does is it helps if you have a foliar feeding insects like chinch pegs and whatnot. It helps keep those at bay. And then watering. A lot of people have watering systems on their lawns, and that's great if you're, building a golf course, I guess. But the thing about watering, and this is true not just with lawns, but with your vegetable gardens and your perennial beds as well. Watering every day or, a couple, 2-3 times a week is actually bad for your plants. You think, well, they need the water. No. What you want to do is water less often, but water deeper. The problem when you water frequently is that water stays at the top of the surface, right? It doesn't get down deep into the soil. So the roots stay and grow where the water is. So your roots don't get very deep. And this is especially critical in a lawn where your roots are generally no deeper than the height of your grass. So when you water frequently, you're not going to get good root depth. Whereas when you water infrequently, but water more deeply, in other words, water longer, but less often, then that water penetrates deeper into the soil. Your roots get down deeper into the soil, and you got a much healthier plant because it can sustain drought periods because you've got deep roots in the ground. Now, one thing you might find in the spring, we got a couple of different types of critters that cause a couple different types of damage. So this one on the left here is moles. And this one on the left here is voles, two different critters. So this is what a mole and this is a vole, and they do different types of damage. Moles are meat eaters. They're carnivores. They eat earthworms, Japanese beetle larvae, grubs that are in the soil. Other than eating the earthworms, the grubs is a good part of what they do. The problem is all those clumps and damage that they do to the lawn. Voles is, whoops, sorry. Oh, come on, back. Voles, vegetarians. They're your real garden destroyers. They eat your roots, they eat your plants, they eat the stuff that you're trying to grow. So when you have those issues, you want to know which one you have, because treatment for, if you're trying to get rid of them, is going to be completely different if your mold damage, your damage is due to moles or your damage is due to voles. And you really need to know that before you go any further. All right, your trees and your shrubs, now's the time to do pruning. We wouldn't have done any pruning in the fall. Pruning in the fall is bad for two reasons. One, pruning promotes growth, and we won't want to try to promote growth in the fall when winter's coming. It's going to freeze that fresh new growth and damage it, probably kill it. And the other thing that pruning does is it creates a wound in the tree or the shrub. And when we prune, now that tree has to focus its energy on healing that wound. When in the fall, what we want that tree or shrub to be doing is sending that energy into the root system to provide better winter hardiness. So we don't prune in the fall, we prune in the spring. Scout for signs of pest and disease. And again, I would ask if, for those that are here, what is this? This is a magnolia tree. This is Magnolia scale. Scale is an insect. And these little white circles are all insect colonies. Hundreds of little insects in there, and they create this scale. They exude this scale over their bodies, and that protects them from predators. Best time to deal with them is when they're in the walking stage. That when you can, best time to get to them. If you have a tree or a shrub and you notice a lot of ant activity, you got ants crawling up and down that trunk or crawling up and down that stem of that tree or that shrub, you really want to focus on what's going on up top, because it's a pretty good indication that you've got scale or aphids. Both of those exude a honeydew, sweet honeydew, and that's what those ants are going after, right? So if you see those signs, a lot of ant activity on your stems, you want to be looking up and seeing what's going on up there, because that's where your problem is. If you have any thin bark trees, fruit trees, birch trees, anything that gets this gash in the tree, you could generally see this on the southwest side of the tree. This is called sun scald, and it's caused by those warm thawing days we have in the middle of the winter. January we get them, February we get them, where we'll get 2 or 3 days of warm weather. The water just inside the bark will thaw, and then of course it gets cold again at night, freezes, and it's that freezing that causes that cracking. 2 ways to fix that is we can use what's called tree wrap. It's this white material that you wrap around. You only do about 4 feet high. Another solution, and probably easier, better long-term solution, if you don't mind it being that way year round, is to take white latex paint, cut it 50-50 with water. So you got 50% water, 50% white latex paint, paint that around the trunk of the tree, and that will solve the problem. What it does is, oh, going crazy here. What it does is it reflects that heat off of the tree so that the tree doesn't thaw. So another problem with voles is they will chew the bark of the tree. Gotta get that picture out of there. So a hardware cloth up about at least a few inches above the maximum snow depth and down about 6 inches of the soil will keep voles, rabbits as another one that can get at those trees. So that will help keep those gnawing animals from getting at it. Yeah, what have we got?
Question.
Yeah.
If you want to water a lawn deep, about how long would you run a sprinkler if it hasn't rained in, say, about 5 days? How many days a week would you do that watering?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. It's really, it kind of, there's so many factors that go into that. I can't give you a days or hours or times or minutes answer. But really what you want to do is poke a little hole down in the soil and either with your finger or cut a little plug with, I have it with me. Cut a plug with that bulb tool that I showed you earlier. Still in the truck. Just make a core that you can get down about 4 to 5 inches, 4 to 6 inches, so that you can kind of pull that core up and see, is the moisture getting down to that? You want to get it down at least 4 inches, 6 inches is better. And that will give you an indication of is the water getting down deep enough into the soil. If it's still kind of dry down there, then keep watering. Do more water until that water gets down to that point. Does that help?
Yes.
All right, excellent, thank you. That was a good question. All right. Again, in the fall, our evergreens, and by evergreen, I don't necessarily mean pines and fir trees and whatnot. They are evergreen, but we have some deciduous trees that are evergreen and shrubs. So this rhodie is an example. And over the course of the winter, it will have lost a lot of its moisture in its leaves, wicked away by the wind. So we want to get a good amount of watering to help restore the water, get it back into those leaves in the spring. Now, of course, nature's doing that for us. But if you have, if we had a dry spell, especially like earlier in the spring when the snow is melted, but we haven't had a lot of rain, in March or early April, it hadn't got to the April showers yet. And we want to get that water replenished back into the soil. Well, a nice, easy way to do that is when we run water in the sink or in the shower to wait for warm water to get there to take a shower, or warm water to get there to do the dishes or whatever we want to do. If we take a bucket or a pail or whatever to fit in that sink or the tub, and we capture that cold water that's otherwise just running down the drain, being wasted. So we capture that and we carry that out to the yard and water our trees and our shrubs. We're not only improving the water needs of that tree and that shrub, but we're saving our natural resource of water from just going down the drain. And of course, if you live in the city of Manchester, you're paying for that water as if it was going, because it's going down the sewer. So you're paying it on both ends. So you might as well take advantage of that, right? Not that water's expensive. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying, as humans, we got to do a better job of conserving our natural resources. And that's one way that we can do that. Container plants, if you brought any container plants in that you overwintered over, especially non-hardy plants, now's a good time to kind of check those over, repot them if necessary, check for any diseases, any insects that might have overwintered along with the plant, any diseases that might have overwintered, and get rid of those. Let's clean up some tools and supplies. Again, when we're getting ready to put our stakes and whatnot in our garden supports and whatnot, we don't necessarily remember which garden they came out of, so we might be transferring pathogens from one part of our garden to a different part of our garden, and we don't want to do that. So we want to make sure we clean those. And again, we can bleach them. The difference between bleach and isopropyl alcohol is that while the isopropyl alcohol acts very fast, bleach has to soak for about 20 minutes, 1 to 10, 1 to 9, 10 to 1, or 10% solution of bleach needs to soak for about 20 minutes to kill any pathogens or bacteria that might be on those things. So isopropyl is a little bit faster, but again, depending on what it is that you're trying to clean, bleach might be the better solution, but just keep in mind that it does need to soak longer with bleach than with isopropyl. Sharpen our tools, again, not just our shovels, but our other garden tools that we might use. Sharpen our pruning tools. There's a great video online for how to take this thing apart and sharpen your pruners. They're very easy to do so. Now's a good time of year to do that, so everything's nice and sharp and clean going into the season. Any of our power tools, a good time of year to go ahead and get those tuned up. Some other tasks that we can do is let's clean out our bird boxes if we have them. We'll make sure to give the new birds nesting this year a good fresh home to live in. Again, any pathogens, diseases that might have been left by the previous generation, you know, we don't want to transfer that to the next generation. Build a bat house. Bats are a great addition to the yard. Bat houses, there's a lot of DIY plans online for building those. But great to have bats around. You don't want them in your house, but you want them around your house. Obviously, if you've been sitting with your compost here, it's a good time of year to get that compost pile turned over, refreshed. If you're going to put some new beds in, it's a good time to be doing that. If you aren't composting, build a compost pile. This is my 3-bin system that I use. It's super effective. I showed you that I can get my temperatures up into the red zone, but you don't need to be this complicated or this fancy. Complicated. You know, this bed right here that cost me less than $50 to build. It's all made out of pallets, pretty quick and easy to build. But you can compost in a trash bag. You don't need a big space to compost. I really encourage people that aren't currently composting to do so. One third of what goes into the Manchester Municipal Solid Waste Facility, 1/3 is materials that could be composted. 1/3. Think about that. What it costs to build new landfills, right? We're kind of limited here in the city of Manchester. Yeah, DIY. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff, you know, we search online for stuff to do stuff in the garden, right? And so we'll search something and we're going to get, you know, companies that are trying to sell you something. We're going to get Joe's Garden blog, you know, information that, you know, we're not real sure if that's valid information. Can we really truly trust that information? We don't know, right? So I'm going to give you probably the most important information, the most important piece that you're going to take away from today's presentation. When you're going to search for something, pick a topic, doesn't matter. Let's say I wanted to search for I'm just going to throw that out there. Say I want to search for bed bugs. If I type in bed bugs and hit search, I'm going to get companies that want to try to sell me something, right? But if I type bed bugs and then leave a space and then type in this phrase, type in site, S-I-T-E, site, S-I-T-E, :edu, and then hit enter. Now, only thing I'm going to see is information from colleges and universities, research-based factual information that I can now honestly figure out how I'm going to deal with that particular problem. I could do the same thing with .org. So for instance, when I wanted to search for, like I mentioned earlier about searching for places that would do soil tests, I did both. I did site.edu and I did site.org. And that gave me organizations and educational facilities where I could go and get a soil test done. And when you type that site : blah, 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 what it tells your search engine, whether it's Bing or Google or whatever, it says, I want you to search for this particular topic, but I only want you to search for the URLs that end in .edu or end in .org. And now you're getting information that you can trust. You're getting information that you can rely on, that's factual based. You know, old wives' tales got passed down through generations. Well, they did so because there was some truth to it, but only, you know, it wasn't guaranteed. Sometimes it worked and sometimes it doesn't work. But if you want something that guaranteed to work, guaranteed to solve your problem, it's that site.edu and that site.org that's going to solve that problem for you. So stay away from DIY stuff that you see on the internet. Go with something that you can trust. And then, you know, remember, it's a big picture, right? How many people would see that crawling on a plant and get out there and stomp on that ugly creature. Oh my God, what kind of damage is that thing doing? That is the larva stage of a ladybug. And we know that ladybugs are a hugely important predator in the gardens that kill bad bugs, right? So we want to make sure this one keeps going. So understanding what you got going on is really important. And it's a gradual process. You know, don't try to get it all done in one weekend. Just like it takes time for a plant to grow from a seed and sprout and grow and flourish and become a plant and produce fruit. It takes time, right? It takes time for us to get stuff done in the garden. Now, I want to finish up with one really, really important thing. And it's becoming a problem across the state. I know it's here in Manchester, and it's what we call the jumping worm. And the jumping worm is a hugely destructive invasive that can wreak absolute havoc, more so in the woods and in the forest than in the gardens, but obviously it's going to start somewhere and it's going to work its way over. Well, how do I see if I have jumping worms? Well, one way to tell, and you know, they say, well, if you find a worm and it squirrels like crazy, well, that's a jumping worm. Well, you know, when I was a kid and I used to go fishing, you take an earthworm and put that sucker on a hook, that thing squirmed like crazy. So I don't know what level of squirming determines whether it's a jumping worm or an earthworm. So one way I can tell in my garden if I've got jumping worms is I can take about a cup of ground mustard, and I'm going to mix that in a gallon of water, mix it up real good so that mustard dissolves, and then I'm going to pour that around my garden area. And what's going to happen is it's going to soak into the soil, and you want the soil to be really dry, because if the soil is really dry, it's just going to wash off and it's not going to soak in well. So you want the soil to be damp, not soaking wet, but damp. And so I'm going to pour that into the soil, and it's going to soak down into the soil. Now, the jumping worms are in the top few inches of soil. The earthworms are generally down deeper, but of course they're going to be at all levels. But the jumping worms only exist in the top, few inches of soil. So what's going to happen when that mustard water gets on them? They go, "What the heck is going on?" And they're going to crawl up to the surface to figure out what the heck's going on, to get away from it, right? And now you can see you get the worms on the surface. Now it doesn't kill them, doesn't hurt them. So, well, unfortunately it doesn't kill them, but of course it has the same effect on earthworms as jumping worms. We don't want to kill the earthworms. So there's 4 identifiers that help us determine whether we've got a jumping worm or an earthworm. And it's all about the clitellum. And that's this band that's near the head of the worm. On the earthworm, the clitellum is a kind of whitish or gray color compared to pink on the earthworm. The clitellum is level to the body compared to raised on an earthworm. The clitellum goes all the way around the body on a jumping worm compared to only partway around the body on the earthworm. And then a little more difficult to discern, the clitellum is very close to the head of the jumping worm versus the clitellum's location on the earthworm. Now, if you have jumping worms, use that mustard to get them up out of the soil, and then obviously you want to kill them. But why I really want to raise this is a time of the year when a lot of us gardeners, being expeditious and liking to save money, like to go to plant sales and buy our plants at plant sales. And a lot of plant sales that plants that we get at plant sales come from members' gardens, which is great. And please, don't ever take this to say don't do that. Please continue to support your garden clubs and the animal shelter, which does a plant sale as well. Please continue to support those and get your plants, or at least some of them, at these plant sales. But what you want to do now that you brought this plant, so as she mentioned earlier, I'm on the executive board of the New Hampshire Federation of Garden Clubs. We have member clubs within the state, and we encourage best practices. So our clubs that take plants to plant sales, we do this for you. So if you go to, I know Manchester is a federated garden club. I belong to the Hooksett Garden Club. They're a federated garden club. I'm not sure what other ones are Bow, if you, and where you all are from. So if you're from this general area, those garden clubs are in our federation, and we solve this problem for you. But if you get a plant from plant sale, you're not real sure, ask them at the plant sale, tell me how you got this plant. If don't get a good answer or you're not sure, here's what you do. You take the plant that you bought or plants and take it out of the pot, rinse all of the soil off of that plant and into a container or a tub. Scrape as much off as you can, rinse off the rest, but keep it in a tub. Don't let it run down the driveway. Don't let it run into your lawn. Don't let it run into your garden. This time of year, you don't see the worms. All you're going to see this time of year, and you're not going to see them, but all that's in that soil, if the earthworms are, if those jumping worms are present, is the cocoons and the eggs, and they're tiny. They're no bigger than the greenest dirt soil in the soil. So you're not going to see them. So you want to rinse that off, completely clean those roots, replant that plant in a soil that you're sterile soil that you're either purchased or have got from your garden or whatever. Take the soil that you rinsed away, put it in a black 55-gallon black plastic bag, tighten it up, set it out in the driveway, leave it out in the sun for 3, 4, 5 days. Nice hot sun out in the driveway, on the patio, on the deck, anywhere where it's going to get nice and hot. And what that's going to do is going to kill those eggs, going to kill those cocoons, going to kill anything that's in that bag, including pathogens. Now you've got nice, fresh, sterile soil, which you can now use elsewhere in your garden. And that is the best way to ensure that any plant that you get from a friend, a neighbor, a plant sale, or whatever, that you don't know what could possibly be in that soil. It's a way to make sure that you don't get those jumping worms into your soil. Now, as I said before, the real danger to these jumping worms is more in the woods. They're voracious eaters of organic matter, so they do destroy your organic matter in your garden, which you want organic matter, but they're gonna chomp it all up. But the real issue in the woods and in the forest is that because they're such voracious eaters, they destroy that organic matter, and what they leave behind is casing, which is kind of the consistency of coffee grounds. And what happens is the seedlings of our next generation of forests and woods the seedlings won't propagate in that destroyed organic matter. So it's a long-term problem right now that we're still looking to find a solution. Hopefully we will by the time it gets to where it really becomes critical mass. So again, I do represent UNH Extension. We are able to solve all of these various problems for you. You can do that one of 3 ways. One is to call the 800 number if you have a specific question that you'd like to ask. Monday through Friday from 9 to 4 is the office is open, but master gardeners like myself are staffed from 9 to 2. You can send an email if that's easier for you, or if you have a picture of a bug or a plant or a problem with a plant or whatever, and you want to know what kind of plant it is or what's eating my plant or what kind of bug is this, you can send that pictures to answers@unh.edu. Or if you happen to be in the Goffstown area, it's not too far from us here in the Manchester area, you can bring the bug in a container or bring your plant in. And we have experts on staff at this location that can answer those questions for you. So we didn't get a lot of questions along the way. What questions did not get answered for y'all? Great.
Do you have any recommendations for starting a clover lawn?
A clover lawn. That should be pretty easy, actually. Yeah, so clover seed is available at dozens of different seed catalogs. I would shoot for ones from New England or anything in the north area. Johnny Seeds is local. There's the one in Vermont. I can't remember the name offhand. Prairie View Nursery is out of Minnesota, but they do a lot of northern type species. And yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because, you know, we've all heard about, you know, bees and our food supply, right? And a third of what we consume as human beings is there because of bees, and bees are dying. The populations are declining, all kinds of bees, honeybees, bumblebees, native bees, etc. And clover is grows in our lawns like dandelions. And those of us that care about our food supply and care about our bees and want them to have a good food source, the early season when the flowers aren't blooming yet in New Hampshire, we're very few flowers blooming this time of year. There's some, but not a lot. And really most of what's blooming are the weeds, the clover and the dandelions and whatnot that's in our lawns. And so many people just that want to eradicate those particular weeds in our lawn. And I get it. I mean, it's your own personal philosophy. Me, I let the dandelions grow. I let the clover grow. I let the yellow bonnets and the blue bonnets and all the different plants, because that's a source for nutrients and a source for nectar for those early season bees that are out trying to forage and find food and whatnot. So yeah, clover, yeah, you can get that in a number of different catalogs, and just find something preferably that's native, because again, think about it's the same thing with native plants that we want to put in our yard. Native bees, native birds, native hummingbirds, all those things evolved with our native plants. And when we go into a catalog and we buy these beautiful looking plants that look nice to us but aren't native, the bees and the birds and the butterflies, they don't know what that plant is. They may come to it, they may look for it but they're going to focus on the native plants that they grew up with all through a time. So we try to focus on native clovers, native plants, native flowers that these butterflies and moths and bees have grown up with over time. That's it. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you got your questions answered. If you didn't, again, I'll just put that back up on the screen real quick. Feel free to contact us. Feel free to contact me if you have any specific questions, and I'm happy to answer those for you. All right.
Thank you very much for joining us. Have a great night.